Hey everybody! Welcome back to Hive Live. This is Sage Hayes. We're broadcasting from Australia. It's so exciting. Good morning from Australia. It's a little bit after 8 here, and
Saturday.
It's Saturday,
Yeah.
which is incredible. And I know on the East Coast, where I'm from, it's 7 p.m. on Friday night, which is mind-boggling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm from LA, so it's 4 p.m. I believe over there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So welcome from all the time zones. There's already 7 people who are watching, which is super fun.
Hello, everyone.
You guys, I'm really excited. We're broadcasting from down under, and I'm really have been looking forward to having Ali Moinzadeh on Hive Live. Ali's a colleague of mine in the somatic experiencing world, and we're both here down in Perth, Australia, assisting a somatic experiencing training, folks who are in the beginning year of somatic experiencing. So we're on a team. It's a 6-day workshop that we're here for, and I got an opportunity to meet Ali when I came to Australia last August, and just an amazing man, and does amazing work, and it's just a real pleasure to get to know him. And I immediately, when I started this project, I immediately knew that I wanted to have you on if we were going to be in Australia again. So thank you for being on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So where we usually start is just to tell folks a little bit about who you are before we get into your work.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Ali Moinzadeh, and I'm a gay man. I'm originally from Iran. I was born there and grew up in Ohio, so that's where the accent is from. It's a combo. People always wonder where I'm from. Let's see, I basically was a son of immigrants, and came here, and then I came to California for college and just never looked back. And God bless Ohio, and I still have dear friends there, and I visit them. And I'm very happy to be in one of the blue states on the West Coast, although there's lots of pockets of blue in Ohio too. So, here's to Midwest and everywhere else.
Nice.
I became a doctor, a medical doctor first, mainly because by the time I was 12, I was given a stethoscope, and I was basically told that is what you're going to be. And as a good gay immigrant son who was trying to kind of not show up as gay, I think being a medical doctor was sort of like what my family wanted, and I sort of went that route. So it was definitely something that over the years I actually had to come to terms with what does medicine really mean to me. And I love being a doctor now, but there was a whole journey around that process. And when I finished medical school, I did rehab, which is physical medicine rehab, which is interesting because it's really like after the traumas happened, and then you sit down with people and you kind of work on their injuries, and there's a combination of physical therapy and acupuncture and speech therapy and occupational therapy and all these modalities coming together to kind of get the person together, whether it's strokes or car accidents or amputations or whatever. It's the
post-incident.
Exactly, and it's a long time. You can kind of sit with the person, you get to know them. It's so much more my pace. But then when I finished that, I realized that actually, even though I became a pain management doctor and a rehab doctor, I really realized my heart was somewhere more passionate regarding my own self and my own journey around being psychological, which was sort of like I was coming out. I kind of came out of the closet when I was in my early 20s. And I'm sort of like, okay, I'm not going to just be this kind of good boy. And as I started to do that, I started my own therapy, and I got really excited about psychology. And actually I got interested in a particular form of psychology, which is really big in LA. It's called Uranian psychoanalysis. And Aphrodite Urania, that's like Plato's image for the kind of the goddess of higher love, which was sort of what, or heavenly love, which was something that he talked about in terms of the love between same gendered people rather than opposite gendered, sort of, and how it leads to philosophy and art and all sorts of things. So it's a Jungian-based kind of work, and I got super excited, went to school and studied psychology, became a psychologist, and then along the way did all sorts of other things, because obviously the kind of psychology I did, which had to do more with Jungian and all that, didn't bring in the body as much. that's where somatic experiencing came in, and I really loved incorporating the bottom up kind of model.
Meaning comes working with the body first.
Yeah, rather than kind of
head first.
Yeah. You don't go to the CEO to ask what's happening in the boiler room.
It's like, true story.
So it's like, you just sort of really like want to work. If like you want to change the temperature, you kind of like change the amount of coal in the in the sort of the engines rather than put the executive command, and it should happen. And
that's a great metaphor.
It feels like it makes sense to me, that way of doing it. So somatic experiencing, which is where I've met a lot of good people, great people like yourself, and along the way I've done all sorts of other things, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, great. Well, let's probably talk about some of those. So
sure.
Thank you for that intro. There's so many things in the intro I actually want to touch on. The first is you said when you were in the process of, I think, going through medical school and taking in so much, you sort of had to figure out what medicine meant to you. And I would kind of curious about fast forward now with all the different lenses you have and the modalities that you do and the experiences that you have. What would you say medicine means to you now? Like if you were to define it for you as a practitioner?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you're asking it. I think medicine, first of all, I look at it as healing. And the Western model of healing is wonderful in all sorts of ways. But it's about distancing yourself. It's like, I'm going to take myself out. I'm going to draw blood from you, and I'm going to see what your chemistry is like. I'm going to look, put you in a tube and sort of do an MRI of your brain or your body. I'm going to, sort of really assess you that way. Or even if I'm going to cut you open, it's like, I'm going to be behind a sterile space and, with my gloves on, and you're there, and it's like the sterile field of the surgery, and that's where I'm going to do the work. And so
there's a distance. It's like almost like how far can I get away from you? And
that's really the problem of both the problem and the amazing thing about really Western philosophy and the Western mind is that it sort of separates itself in order to observe something and then treat it objectively. Of course, what we're discovering is there's no such thing as objectivity. Really, like, quantum mechanics is showing that. All sorts of things are really showing us that really the person showing up and how you observe something, actually impacts what you see.
Yeah.
So,
isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Right. How we see, what framework I bring to things, what my lenses are. If I'm treating you, it all has an impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that you're treating me versus someone else treating me.
Yes.
The connection we have. And so I think the piece that I really discovered through the other stuff, including psychology and somatic experiencing and acupuncture, and all of these things, is that really who you are as a subjectivity is really what matters, and the person's illness, whatever it is also really unique to them. So yeah, it's fine to say, it's my back hurts and it's because I have an L4-5 disc, and that's sort of what the Western mind does. It's like, I'm going to take a picture of it. I see that this is what is causing a problem, and yeah, that's true. You do have that L4-5 disc, and it is causing these things, and maybe doing a steroid injection is going to help you, or maybe doing surgery is going to help you, or maybe physical therapy is going to help you. But it's also like, well, what's being held in the back? So many people who had sexual trauma, it's like the body's energy has been pulled up, or or oftentimes I find like men hold a lot of their anger in the low back. So it's like if you don't start to kind of see like, why did this happen at the time it happened? And
that's such a great tool, and it's not something that most of us in the West at all have been conditioned, trained, even and certainly not encouraged to think.
No.
Like you even bring something like that to a sort of traditional doctor, and they sort of often roll their eyes, right?
Yeah.
So what you're sort of suggesting is yes to the some of the Western modalities, and ask some questions about noticing. Okay, I have a disc, whatever. Like what was going on when it happened? What might I be holding back there?
Right.
Let me sort of sense into it.
Exactly, or whether it's autoimmune disorder or anything. Really doesn't matter. Diabetes, physical heart attacks, whatever's happening. That there's your illness suits something that's happening in you.
Do you have an example of that? I know it's sort of off the.
You have so many.
I know. I imagine you would.
I'm thinking of a woman that I treated about 15 years ago, and she, beautiful woman, I saw her in the hospital, and she had come in actually after back surgery. She'd had like a 2-level lumbar fusion, and it was because she was having all this pelvic pain. And we're sort of like talking and stuff like that, and she's like, yeah, I'm hoping this will fix it. Because what had happened before that was that they'd actually done both hip replacements. Now this woman's like only in her 50s, and at first they thought the pain was, the hip pain was in her hips, so they had done hip replacement surgeries. That didn't work, so now we're going to do the back. So we start to kind of talk and relate, and I'm just sort of like, well, this is really unusual, and you're so young, and what's happening? And I'm like, did anything happen maybe like in the last 6 months before you started having symptoms? That's a great question.
Did anything happen in the 6 months before symptoms?
And what she told me was like, oh yeah, she'd been a birth mother, and she had been Catholic, and she'd been sent into one of those like really like sort of school like houses for wayward girls, when she had been 16. And the moment the baby had been born, the baby had been sent off, so she never actually got a chance to even bond with this baby. And about 6 months before all this, her adult son had found her and shown up at her door.
Wow.
And it's like when you start to kind of think about okay, it's really not the hips. It's like this pain she's holding in this part, this trauma, this shame, all these other pieces that are showing up, and no surgery is going to fix that.
So did you work with that?
So that was the thing. It's like your journey is really about what this means to you. And I mean, there was a lot of tears there. There was a lot of anger there. I mean, a lot of work with shame that you had to do. And along the way, I mean, yes, now she's had all these surgeries, so there's also trauma related to that.
For sure.
She has to go through rehab to kind of discover how to walk again and all that stuff. So all that stuff is happening, and you also want to kind of incorporate this other piece.
Yeah. And what would you say that she was different once she started to incorporate it?
It's like she's not passive in relationship to what's happening to her body.
That's a big deal.
Which is what had happened to her when she was, going through the process in the first place. That other people, authority decided for her. The religious authority, the parental authority, all these things that sort of were outside of her that basically controlled her body, and controlled what she was doing. So I think, it was really important that she become empowered about, oh, you mean I get a chance to really tell my story and express it and feel it and really sort of reclaim my body.
And did you see some of the symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. Over time, and it's like this is one of the challenges of our Western medicine, also the Western mind, is that we have this cause and effect. Like when this happens, then did I see results?
Right.
She was a more integrated person.
Right.
She, like, the pain was in some ways there, but it was like different.
Yeah.
Like she had a different capacity for holding it. She was a different kind of sort of overall, kind of how she viewed herself, how she viewed her interest, or relating to this, man who had shown up at her door, as her son. All these things were like, different. She could be more present with herself.
And it sounds like also you said she had more authority over her own body. She had taken that authority that had sort of been affecting her, that she had to tolerate, and she reclaimed that. And so there was more choice and more agency. And you are in such a unique position as both a doctor and a psychologist. I mean, talk about authority that people give over, right, to doctors, that your framework, given your training and your, you sort of desire to collaborate with people and create empowerment versus replicate the same old, like, you should do this, take this, that traditional. You're in such a unique position to ask those questions, because a lot of times, therapists are body workers, but doctors, it's like such a cutting edge. It's crazy that it's such a cutting edge, but it is really such a frontier for a doctor to be, curious about those things and to slow it down.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think, the degrees kind of help in that way.
Yeah,
it gives me the authority to then actually ask the human questions that if I ask just as a human, I could be dismissed and say, oh, well, who are you? But if I sort of have the titles behind my name, I can kind of actually stand really against any of the sort of authorities out there, and kind of say, well, actually, and I mean, I can bring science to it, I can, really demonstrate that I'm not someone that's a pushover.
Yeah.
And I think, so that's one aspect of actually my training, that I can kind of say, okay, all of this happened, and some of it, I definitely don't want to, I wish I hadn't, missed out on my 20s because I was like, down in the residency and in hospitals and all that the whole time. But now that I'm here, I sure am glad that I have the wherewithal to say, like, well, listen, this is what I see, and my experience of it this way. And again, it's my subjectivity with the other subjectivity. It's not like, ultimately about authority as something outside of yourself.
Right.
Because the moment we give up our power, then we are in the hands of the mob, and we're in the hands of really bad mommies and daddies out there, who can be our presidents or our, gurus or whatever else, we talk about.
Absolutely, yeah, well said about that. And speaking of that, like giving over our authority, we're living in the United States right now. I get that we're in Australia, which I'm surprised they let us in after what happened. But, kind of curious about your experience as the son of an immigrant, as a gay man, as an Iranian American, what this political moment is stirring up for you, like as a doctor, but also as a practitioner and as a person. And if there's anything you'd like to speak to around that right now.
Boy, there's just so much there.
Yeah, well, I think it would be really amazing to hear your voice.
And there's like different levels of it. And I can feel the part of me that wants to kind of go more into like saying it from the perspective of, my clients and all that, because, or even just the political moment, because it's safer than to actually talk about it in terms of my own self.
Yeah, sure.
So, I grew up in the U.S., and we came right after the hostage crisis had started in '79, and so, growing up in Ohio, where everyone had a yellow ribbon and, Mickey Mouse gave the finger saying, "Hey, Iran," so at one level, this isn't new. What we're going through, this is a violence that's been in our society in terms of like, really a projection of the other onto anyone that's not the same as us. Whether that is, LGBT, or people who are Muslim, or brown, or, black, or, disabled, or whatever you want to kind of call it. It's like, it's all those different groups, or differently abled, I should say, So I think, there's a way in which we're seeing really this moment kind of in a way, it's like stirring up the pot so that we really see what the shadow side of what it means to be living in this moment in human history. But I remember, when I had my green card back in the day, and I remember actually, in order to get my green card, I remember like we had to sort of sign some sort of form, and I was like, young boy then, but I still understood. Back then, there were two questions you had to answer no to. One was that I have never read a communist pamphlet or been part of a communist party, and the other was that I'm not a homosexual or never have been interested in that.
I had no idea that was on there.
This was American U.S. government, like, up until I think the early 90s or maybe late 80s that they took it off.
Wow.
But it's like, so it's like, again, this history of really discrimination's been there all along. So at one level I sort of see, okay, well, it's really disturbing, but it's also what really we've had to deal with, and political correctness doesn't do it. It just sort of like, it's like adding vanilla or rose water or whatever on top of shit. It doesn't make the shit smell any better. And I sort of feel like, we are getting disturbed in this moment in human history, and I think we have to be disturbed.
Yes.
Our planet is like, on the verge of environmental collapse. It's like, and it's like fractals. Like every little piece you start, you like realize, oh my God, there's so much awfulness that's happening. And there's also some wonderful things that are happening. Humanity is growing, and there's growing consciousness. But the shadow of humanity, and this is where I think it's a Jungian model, but that if you don't deal with your own personal shit, it gets added to the collective shit, and then what happens is then we have a mob. And then we do massive projections onto another group, and it's like, we might as well be in ancient Babylon, and we're like, sort of like, throwing stones at the other people because, they are different than us.
Kind of feels like it.
That's what it feels like, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It is it.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is really the core of a problem, I think, of humanity, even at this moment, what I tell myself, what I tell my clients, is that we do need to mobilize and we need to resist and all that, but it has to start from a personal place, internally. When I deal with, reading the next news story that says something awful, that Voldemort, the one who we dare not say his name, I will not say his name because I think he gets too much attention anyways. But whenever I have this sort of I read something that he's done or one of his people have done. It touches right on that gay trauma, or on this place where I feel powerless, and I feel helpless, and I feel like the ones who made the decisions, like my father or my mother or whatever, I'm not able to stop it. It's like I'm invisible, I'm unable to do anything. And oftentimes I sort of feel like the Democrats are like my mother, who was like sort of like, kind of like would just sort of like, be passive and roll over when my father was brutal. So it's like, and again, I understand it was a really awful system she was caught in and she couldn't really speak up for herself. But when I see, that, these Senate hearings are happening and, the Democrats are even, considering possibly like voting for Sessions or whoever. Totally. And I'm like, are you out of your fucking mind? When do we actually then, really have the real opposition who can say, this is bullshit? And I know there are people who are doing that, but I think, internally, it's easy for me to go out there and like sort of like, rally on the street. But how do I then deal with that inner fascist, the inner violent authority that still tells me somehow my being a gay boy is wrong? My touching my partner's hand, yes, there's a fear, but it's like there's also a sense internally that somehow I have to deal with the shame around that. And that's related to the inner authority. That's related to that sort of the way in which that heteronormative sort of power structure was well established in my psyche.
That's right.
And until I'm able to really challenge that, what are we going to do? Like, we're going to replace this asshole and we're going to bring in someone else.
Right, totally.
And meanwhile, the planet keeps going towards like, sort of an environmental catastrophe, really the issues of, race and politics and what it's like to be, LGBT, or what it's like to be different in any way, is not being addressed.
Right.
And everyone's being oppressed.
That's right. Everybody.
Yeah. Everybody.
That's right.
There's privilege, straight men get privilege, but I would say even they're being oppressed. I would say women are being oppressed, even if they think they're not. Even the people who, voted for Voldemort, they think they're not being oppressed, but they are. It's about an internal understanding of that, not an external. It's not a political issue.
Yeah, and how do you invite people into more of that inner process with themselves? Because it seems so outer right now. We just have to do. We have to stop it. We have to resist. Given, you have a lot of lenses as far as doing deep work, particularly Jungian ones in the shadow, which I think is such an interesting perspective to bring in here. How does one, out there obviously there's a million different ways to do the internal work, but what are some questions that you ask or some ways that you work with this type of shame, despair, hopelessness? And within somatics, we talk about it as freeze, immobility.
Right. So these are all great questions, and it's not an easy thing to turn inward, because so much of our world has been designed for us to turn outward.
Yeah.
And so much of our technology is designed about turning outward. It's all about and we can distract ourselves all day, every day, and never go inside. And if you have a moment where you have a feeling, just take a pill for it.
Right.
Or here, do this thing, and you won't feel it anymore. And it's like it's so tempting to not feel inside, because really to feel inside is to feel the environmental catastrophe there, to feel the devastation there, to feel like what's actually happened, who actually owns my body, who actually owns my feelings inside, what's showing up, and in Jungian terms, you might think about that, you have an inner mother or an inner father, and you have the God complex or whatever like that, all the different aspects of whatever tradition you grew up with. And
it's all in there.
It's all in there.
Sort of talking in your unconscious.
Exactly. All the different parts or the voices or the people we see in our dreams, so sometimes I'll ask them about dream work and all that. But one of the things is, as you're noticing what's happening out in the world, what's happening inside you? What are you experiencing inside? Is this reflective of some story you have inside? How does this bad daddy we have right now actually represent some bad daddy that we might actually have all experienced at some version, whether or not in our own personal home, maybe as a school principal or as a system that was, telling us that, we're bad, or throwing us out or throwing us under the bus or whatever. And how did we feel in that moment? And, did we get a chance to have our rage? Did we get a chance to actually feel our sadness? Did we get a chance to be empowered in relationship to that, or did we actually have to just comply? And then that's where it is. Oh, there's something showing up there. So is that like?
Oh no, that's good.
Okay.
It's just yeah.
All right. I thought maybe someone is like asking a question or something. I've never done this kind of thing before.
Yeah. So some people are writing under there, but we can't quite see it from here. So.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, that's so deep. So if you're like, oh yeah, no, actually, he represents, my stepfather who X, Y, Z, and then. It can be so overwhelming to work with, especially if you're on your own, Right.
You need some, actually, this is where I think really, this is deep work, this is therapeutic work. There's a reason psychology showed up, folks, for people 120, 130 years ago. It's one of the things that we have as a tool about going inside. And it's really, and psychology has a really bad history with LGBT, especially in the US, because the way it came to the US was through these sort of like bourgeois kind of, upper sort of class sort of white people, and so it actually was really shaming, and for a lot of its history really did not empower LGBT folks in general. But it's also, there's really important tools in psychology that have to be really taken on by every human being. If we make it in the next 500 years or 1,000 years, my sense is that humanity's evolution is really this internal evolution about us becoming really agents of our own power in a way that we actually are only just beginning to think about.
That is so powerfully said. And I love that you said psychology. What did you say? You said psychology is here for a reason. Like it is here at this moment, and it has tools. And I'm so glad you said that, because I have so many mixed feelings about psychology because of the history that you mentioned, also because of the phenomenal inaccessibility of psychology in this moment to the people who I believe need it most, actually, like need access to deep empowerment, embodiment, and healing, So I have, I struggle with accepting psychology as it has been, and I really appreciate you naming it as, if we can continue to transform it and continue to heal some of that history and continue to think outside of the box and creatively about how we can disseminate psychology in ways that are collaborative and anti-oppressive, so that it works for all and that it is including all.
Yes, absolutely. Because you're right, it's so the inaccessibility, because really this, what I'm talking about is deep work, inner work that requires kind of delving in deep. And it's not, I'm going to do 20 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy and, have my anxiety go from, 7 times a week to 3 times a week, and then that's the end of the story. It's okay, like, why is that anxiety there in the first place? And what is, if you think of it, it's like the anxiety as a visitor that's coming to you. What's it telling you about you? And, my partner, he works, in a center, where, he works with, people who don't have a lot of funds. They're so overwhelmed and swamped that they get, 16 sessions, and then they can't come back for a year. You might be able to extend them for a little bit, but it's like, again, it brings up this whole issue of, the people who really need this work don't have access to it.
And I think even 16 sessions is, most people can't even access 16 sessions.
Right.
If you're on the poverty or you're basically taking care of basic needs.
Exactly, and some of the people have to take 2 or 3 buses just to make it. To there. They've got to be able to be available during the hours. So that means time off from work. It's true. This is where there's a real big problem. And then that brings up all the systems of unjust power that we have. That we're spending millions and billions and trillions of dollars, and and there's the top 100 families in the world probably own more than 60-70% of the wealth of the planet, and and there's people who have to work 3 jobs and they still can't make themselves like have even the time to reflect inwards.
Totally, totally. I want to bring it back to psychology.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree, and I think that sets the stage. How can we do this better within psychology, within somatic work, within these modalities that you and I are in the circles of? Like, do you have any thoughts about how we can do it differently? To be able to create more access. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I'm curious what your thoughts might be, because then I can riff off that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, this project is actually one of them, which is to actually have real practitioners talking about what we're, what healing's all about. So we're demystifying it and we're making it, we're really trying to help folks understand that this is first of all, this is a choice. And healing happens in different ways, and it's not just going into a therapist's office. It's going to a yoga class. It's noticing a symptom in the body, like you said, and saying what was happening when these symptoms started. Right? These are very basic tools, very accessible tools that I think if we infuse more into the consciousness and we normalize them more, we lift them up more. There's just so much empowerment and agency there, because people, I think, with Western medicine, we've been told that we are not the experts on our own body. That the doctors are, and that's just not true, actually. And so part of it is doing things like this, which actually are reflecting a different narrative, that is actually a more honest narrative and a much more exciting narrative for who we can be, and how we can work with what's difficult in our life. Because, having trauma, having terrible things happen to you, right, there's the shame of that, right? There's the compartmentalization, there's the overwhelm of that. And I think we have to just collectively create more capacity. This is, part of what this project is doing, hopefully to create more capacity to have conversations about it so that it doesn't have to feel so shameful.
Right. Right.
We know the statistics of sexual abuse. We know the statistics of childhood trauma, childhood violence, alcohol, all the things that cause overwhelm. So how can we collectively centralize conversations and, dialogues, and so that there's just more room and more safety to have this be present, because it's not going to be any good if we're all in our own little worlds, just having to cope with it, just with me and my therapist. It's I want communities to be creating, sort of transformational conditions so that people can start healing with each other.
Right. These are really great ideas, and I really appreciate your perspective in bringing this sense of how do we actually build community. One of the challenges I find is that the mythology of family has to be changed.
Say more.
The nuclear family, in the way it's been established in the last 150 years, which was a necessary step away from the big tribalism we had. But the nuclear family then establishes the parents as sort of like the gods of your inner world. That then sort of run everything, and whether they're good or bad, then we really spend the rest of our lives trying to kind of recreate this idea of a family. And so oftentimes when we come to a group or a community, the challenge is that we bring all of our issues there. So a group event at some point has to deal with the shadow, because otherwise all these power dynamics show up. And in any group I've been involved with, if you don't deal with the shadow and you think everyone is nice, at some point people aren't nice. At some point there's competition, and there's backstabbing, and feeling hurt and feeling angry, and all sorts of people buying attention from the leader or whatever. And so this process, it's to take psychology into not just the therapy room, but to really be psychological everywhere.
That's right.
It means you have to start with your own work. So things like yoga and any healing modality is a great place to start, to establish safety. But then to really we have to face the part of ourselves we don't want to deal with. The parts that we don't like, that are traumatized, that we feel victimized by, but then really also seeing how if we feel victimized inside, we also have an inner oppressor. And then if we don't deal with that inner oppressor, how does that come in when we get into a group?
Right.
And if we try to recreate our family dynamics with the group, then there's all sorts of power struggles that are happening. So this piece about being psychological in the way I relate to the planet, in the way I relate to another person, in the way we come together. So one of the things I really appreciate about you, Sage, is that you take your own personal story, and then when you come to like a situation where like something challenges you are able to speak up about it in a way that's really empowering, because so many of us have been disempowered around actually having our voice.
That's right.
Speaking up in the group. It's so scary to speak up, especially in a group that you think you like, you like the people or you want to belong. We all have, I definitely have a part of myself that is always feeling like the outsider.
Yeah.
And so wanting to belong is a big old wound and theme. And some parts of me that are desperate to belong anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how does that desperation both make me collude with a system of power, and as well as, make me like dismiss things or then vie to be in charge just so that I can have some of that power. I mean, these are the things that we don't want to face. And even as I'm speaking, like I have to kind of say, like, who the hell are you, like, talking about this stuff? Because it's like there's this inner voice that starts to, challenge, like, well, you're no expert, you're just another dumb person, like talking, like trying to make sense of all this stuff, like the rest of us. Again, and it's true, but if I can not just be crumbled by that inner voice, and instead feel into, wow, okay, it's really fucking hard to be a person.
It's so hard. It's so hard, right now on the planet, and it's hard for different reasons. Everybody's got hard.
Right. And when the house is on fire, it's so like, all we can do is like, okay, we just got to put the water on the fire. But then it's like, okay, and
why was the house on fire?
Exactly. And what do we do? In the Sufi tradition, which is one of the mystical traditions of the world, that I sort of have some relationship with. Not modern Sufis per se, in the sense that I find a lot of them sort of are recreating family again, but those who were actually mystics and oftentimes were LGBT folks, they were people who were outside of the margins. But one of the things that they have is an image of like there's the journey to God or the beloved or the lover, whoever you want to call it, because God is not really just this amorphous man up in heaven, but like, really like the experience of eros and romance and love. But, there's the journey to God, but then there's the journey with God and the journey in God. And it's like if we're always just worried about like just getting to that, but then what happens when we're there? We find that in romance. I just want to, if I can only have a partner, then everything's great. And okay, so now you have one. Now guess what? All sorts of shit is going to come up. Their shit, your shit. How do we deal with that? Do I just avoid it? Do I ignore it? Do I run away? Do I like, act out and have, sort of like 4 other people I bring in, or not to bring in and just, shut down and just like pretend like I don't have a sexual body? All this stuff is part of what it means to be a person. So much of the time we want to kind of hide from those aspects of ourselves that are not easy to deal with. So I think, this moment is good in the sense that it's disturbing us. It's really, we can't, like, in a way, we can't be complacent. I feel like, there is a way in which it's like, when we can project with daddy onto Obama, because, and I'm like, yeah, he's okay, but, also, like, the drone wars continued and got worse under him. All sorts of shit happened. I mean, if Hillary had been elected, I mean, she was the one who, like, sort of bombed Libya, and I mean, I don't think there's a war that she sort of, like, disliked. Yeah. So it's like, we really have to start to say, like, okay, it's so easy for us to just, want to give that power over to this one, and they're like that they're the better of the two, and okay, therefore that then it exonerates us. We don't have to think about it. Let me just cultivate my own little garden.
Yeah, right.
And then meanwhile I can check out. Right. Meanwhile, I just, or the other way, which is like, I've got 2 mortgages to do, and I've got 3 kids, and I've, got like, to worry about the fact that I'm undocumented, and I have to like deal with this and that, and so I don't have time to do my inner stuff. But meanwhile, I'm being abusive to my wife, or I'm being like, sort of like, violent towards my kids, or all sorts of other things are happening, and that's not okay. So really, it forces all of us to actually have to take responsibility for. Collectively, we are in a moment where humanity has to deal with its violence. Yeah. Like,
I'm not even going to say, it's just like, collectively, we're in a moment where humanity has to deal with its violence.
And we have to take responsibility for our individual part.
That's right.
How am I adding to that?
How am I adding to it? How am I adding to it? Yeah. That is like such a powerful question, I think, to land on and to leave folks with, actually. Partially because we got to wrap up. Yeah. Thank you for like just breaking it down and taking us on that journey.
Sure, my pleasure. It was great fun having this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, I mean, we could just go on and on and on, right? But in wrap up, I mean, is there anything else that you want to share about? There's a moment of disturbance right now, and from your work with so many people and in yourself, like any little piece of light, any little piece of offering of that.
Yeah. Well, in the moments of, in the moments where like potentially it could be like the sunset of humanity, we also have the greatest pearls of humanity showing up. I think it's a big fucking deal we can have this video. I think it's a big fucking deal that, there's visibility
like
and LGBT populations are showing up everywhere in the world. I think it's a fantastic thing that, we're having conversations about race and, white privilege is coming up in a way that I've never heard. I mean, growing up in the 80s, it's like, you were talking about seeing Dirty Dancing, and it's like, there's not even a question about like, white privilege, like sort of in that, and everyone is, sort of vanilla muffin. So it's like, it's important that we're actually starting to have these big conversations. We're having the tools. The internet is amazing. I think, there's, for the first time, humanity responds as a big, like, wait a minute, I'm outraged, in Sydney, Australia, or I'm outraged, in, Timbuktu, or I'm outraged in, Los Angeles, or Portland, Maine, or North Carolina, or wherever you're from. So I think, it's a time to use our consciousness and our remembering the history of what humanity's been through. And each of us has elements of our ancestral violence that we have to really respond to. As someone who's Persian, I have to remember that my ancestors got chased by the Mongols. And so when I hear helicopters, some part of me is like, oh my God, the herds are coming, I better run. And I have to face that that's actually like, it's in my genes. I gotta face that so that I'm not just afraid. So that I can respond other than just from a place of terror. And so these are elements of what we have to do is like use the tools we have. There's so much available now. But it's not an intellectual thing. It's not an intellectual thing. You could read every goddamn book in the world. You can watch every YouTube. It's not going to make the difference unless you really start to apply it. The instrument is ourselves. And we got to learn how to play it. And make mistakes, but you got to learn to play it. And no one else is going to learn to play it for you.
Boom! Boom!
Thank you. All right.
Oh my God! Enough said. I mean, really. Enough. Amazing. Thank you so much. How can people find you if they want to? You don't have a website, or
I don't have a website. I mean, I'm a little bit on the somatic experiencing site. They can find me through that. The member
directory.
Services, the directory. And I've avoided Facebook and all that sort of stuff. Primarily it's like and set boundaries with how you get information from the world, so that you're not just inundated with everyone else's stuff, so that you have a perspective you can do, around that. Self-care includes how we absorb the information that comes to us. Whether it's from the internet or from newspapers or the media or whatever else, or from friends even. So, really, and find like-minded people to get psychological, get into your anger, get into being embodied as the people we are. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Perth, Australia, for bringing us together. Thank you, Somatic Experiencing, for bringing us together here. Hope you guys have a great day or a great night wherever you are. In the next week, I'm going to be on a couple more interviews with some amazing Australians, so I'm really looking forward to bringing you some folks from down here who are doing incredible work. The Hive directory, we're so psyched. We're going to keep it going. Have a great day. Lots of love. Be well, y'all.
Thank
Blessings.
you. Bye.
Take care.